So I wanted to do a close-up of the two stitches used in this video. There are the front stitches and the back stitches. And the reason that I often use the other knitting terminology is that I want you to be able to transpose these patterns that are written for straight knitting needles to your rods, because there are literally hundreds of beautiful patterns that only include knit stitches or purl stitches. So when I did this video and transposed this pattern for this cowl, and you see the word, or any pattern that you use, and you see the initial K or the word knit, or you see the P means purl, I want you, when you see the K or the knit, to be knitting through the back of the stitch. And when you see purl, I want you to knit through the front of the stitch. And I call those front stitches for the P, back stitches for the K. Now I've actually reversed that in the past on the stationary rods, and I've called them the opposite. And I don't want you to be confused, because even this terminology is wrong, because we're going to use the back of the leg instead of the front of the leg, as you usually do with a knitting needle. But my key point is I want you to be able to pick up any knitting pattern that's made to be knit in the round, and you can follow that pattern and make it on your circular hoop. So I want to go over the stitches again. So first I want to make a bunch of front stitches, or what are sort of purl stitches, and I'm using the other hoop that I made out of the coat hanger, so it's not very pretty. You just want to make sure it's good and smooth. And we're going to do some close-ups. I'm going to show you another way of carrying your yarn onto the crochet hook. Now, the larger the crochet hook you use, the easier it will be to put on the opposing rod if it's flat on the top. But if you've rounded it, you can probably get away with an N like this one. And when you make your front stitches, or if you see a pattern that's written for knitting in the round on straight knitting needles, it will be the P, or purl, P-U-R-L. And I want you to take your crochet hook and put it into the stitch, and make sure you're using the stitch you intend to knit. In other words, don't knit into the body. Make sure you're knitting under the back leg of the stitch that's going around the left side of the rod. And then if you have issues with your hands or fingers, just take your yarn and lift it onto the hook. You can hold it down with your thumb. That way you don't have to turn your wrist. And pull the hook through. Now here is the new stitch on the hook. You can take the old stitch, either use your index finger or your thumb, and take the old stitch off. And then when you pipe the stitch on the other side, you turn it over like so and drop it. In other words, remember, we're going marching around just like we did when we've made them with our fingers. So the crochet hook goes in from back to front. The yarn goes over the hook. The yarn gets pulled from front to back. The old stitch comes off, and the new stitch gets piped like so. In other words, I'm putting it face down on the opposite rod. So from that back to front, the yarn comes over, the stitch gets pulled through, the old stitch comes off, new stitch goes on. Through the back leg, from back to front, put the yarn over and hold it down with your thumb. Put a little tension on it, helps to bring it through. Take the old stitch off, pipe. We'll make one more. Always make sure you're going in the back leg of the stitch, and you're going into the stitch that's around the rod. Okay, then hold that little tension on that if you want, while you turn the stitch over like so. And if you were making that stitch with your fingers, remember, you hold the yarn in your hand, take the old stitch off, place it over the yarn while you push up with your index finger, pull the yarn through. Now here's the new stitch. It gets piped like that. So if you drop the stitch, that's how you make it with your fingers. Again, I'll do that again. Take the old stitch off, lay it over the working yarn, pull the working yarn through, whoops, and pipe it like that. face down, if you will. And that's how you do front stitches, or if you see a knitting pattern and it says P, purl, that's what you can do. Now, let's do back stitches. If your tubing is flat, like this one, you may want to use a slightly bigger hook. This is a P size, and it'll help you to transfer it over to the other side. So you want to make sure the yarn is behind, because you're going to do a back stitch, or what is sort of a knit stitch. Again, we're using the back leg of the stitch here, not the front stitch like you would do in knitting when you put the knitting needle through, like so. And we're not going to do it that way. It's actually harder to do it that way for the rods on the hoop here. So now you take your hook and you go into this back leg again, and you go this time from front to back, and you want to go right into there next to the rod. You're going to put the yarn over the hook, and you can turn the hook a little if it helps to bring it through. Now you have the new stitch on the hook, slip the old stitch off, and this time when you put it on the rod, it's like that. Notice I just drop it on to the opposing rod. Let's do that again. So now the working yarn is over my hand. I'm going from front to back through the stitch that I want to knit. I hook the yarn, I pull it up, I take the old stitch off, and now I pipe it in such a manner that I'm just dropping it on. And that's about the minimum amount of wrist movement I think that I can come up with for this one. And just drop it. There'll be a little bit of flick in your hand, but not too much. Notice you don't really move your left hand at all. Normally I have this propped against my body or my thigh. It just is a little bit easier. And this is how you do what I'm going to call, what I've been calling, the back stitch. And it's sort of like a knit stitch, except we're using the back leg. But when you see it in a pattern, so that you can transpose your own knitting patterns, we don't have to change the pattern or change any of the rows of knitting like we did for the rods. So this way you can pick up any circular pattern that just uses knits and purls and make it, as long as you know this is what I mean, and that you make the stitches as I do. As we go along, there'll be other things we can do, but just for the time being, whoops. If you drop it, don't worry. See, I dropped that one because I was yapping. So to do a back stitch, as we did with the hats and all those other things, and that you'll do when the rods are bigger. So now here's my stitch. I took the crochet hook out, and I want to back stitch it. I want to knit it, which is what happens on a knitting needle. When you make knit stitches, you come in through the back with the yarn, or the yarn comes from the back to the front. So now here's the working yarn. The old stitch goes against it. Here comes the yarn with here's the new stitch in my right hand, and I put it face down on the side. Let's do that one more time, just to refresh your memory. There's the new stitch. I pull the new stitch through, pipe the new stitch. Should always look like that when you're done. So, thanks for watching. Enjoy your scarf.